and I'm here with Mary Ann Boom Boom Maisano, star of stage, screen, audio, video, burlesque, I think a few other things. And she's also the writer and star of Agita and the creator of the Italian Chick.
Yeah.
So your dad, he was a Mason for a while, and then he came back. And is that when he got the cab? Is that when he started the cab business?
He started the first cab business in Fort Lee. And interestingly enough, the second cab business was my father's cousin, Babe Maisano. So they had Babe's taxi and they had Joe's taxi. Now, the difference between the two, and I didn't learn this until about 8 years ago when I was having dinner in a restaurant, and these lovely women all came over to me and we were talking about Fort Lee. And when a friend of mine mentioned about my dad and Joe's taxi, they went, "Oh my God." Everybody knew my father and my mother. They were like a staple. And it was interesting because they said, "We always used your father's company instead of Babe's because we knew with your father, we were going to get your father, your brother, or your cousins. With Babe's, we were going to get carnival people that were coming into town. And we didn't want to put our kids in a car with carny people." Okay? And then this woman told me the sweetest story, because you learn things, as you grow up, you learn things that soften you more about what your childhood was like. And it gets you to really settle in and understand it better, And she said, and then in the morning, I'd give my kids money and say, "Okay, now when Joe picks you up, when he drops you off, you give him this money." And they, all right. And she said, when they get home from school, they take their clothes off, and I'd go through their clothes and empty their pockets. And they had, they still had some money. And I was saying, I called them in. I'm like, "What the hell? Didn't you give Joe any of the money?" And they said, "Yeah, but Joe said he only charges kids $1." So, it was very sweet to hear that, So he started that company, and the man couldn't read or write English. Everything was phonetics.
Mm.
And then my mom stayed at home and had the taxi phone. So she was there, taking all the messages for the calls. We didn't have CB radios or cell phones. And it was like madhouse because the phones were ringing. And then he got a brilliant idea. I thought it was quite brilliant. He went to the lumberyard and he got an old telephone pole and he plowed it into the front of the ground in the house. And he put a huge spotlight on top. And he ran a wire through the yard into the house. And anytime the phone rang, my mom would write down the call because he was parked right around the corner at the taxi stand by the bridge. So he could see that spotlight from where he was sitting. So anytime my mom got a call and he wasn't there, she'd write it down, plug the spotlight in, and then he'd come home and get the call.
Tell the funny stuff. I want you to tell, because I know you played in rock bands and you played in wedding bands. So I want you to tell the wedding band story about, because I have a story for you after you tell your story.
Well, yeah. So in the wedding bands, it was kind of horrible, listen. But you made a lot. You made way more money than you did in any bar. But so that's why you did them. So the wedding band, you'd go, and then the cocktail hour was the worst because nobody believed me. But people didn't hear anything you saying because they were too busy eating and talking and this and that. And I used to say to the guys in the band, they don't listen to what we're saying because they did. And nobody believed me. So the band, the guy who was, calling out the tunes, he goes to me, "Okay, calls out the tune." So we start doing this bossa nova, real sexy and soft, And I figured I would, screw them up a little bit. And I changed the words to the song, right? So I'm singing, "She was tall, she was tan, she was hot. She was tall, she was tan, she was hot, and she walked on down from the aisle of Ipanema with a big straw hat and a dildo named Sam." Wow, the guys were hysterical, and and everybody in the audience was fine, like nothing was wrong in Ipanema. They just kept eating the shrimp.
And I'm here today with Paul Spadoni, the author of An American Family in Italy, and I believe without permission, correct?
Right, living the La Dolce Vita without permission.
So now I want to talk about you taking this leap of faith with 2 teenage girls, which I could just imagine. The book really outlines it pretty clearly, and having to navigate around the language, the trains, the schools, the work. I mean, how did this all come together? And I know you have a couple of stories about it. I think the train and I think one about going to get some paperwork done, right?
Oh yeah, we tried to get our permesso di soggiorno. Well, first of all, I didn't actually have permission to work there. The headmaster of the school, he was a little bit loose on the regulations, and he just needed somebody for 1 year to fill in for a teacher who had quit suddenly. So he said, well, really, we should get the work permit. He says, but that's so difficult. He said, just tell them that you're coming there for vacation. Now, this was pre 9/11, and so they weren't quite as checking things as much. So he said, just come and tell them that you're a tourist there. And yes, now I know you can only stay for 3 months at a time, but I don't even know if they stamped our passports when we came in through Rome. Sometimes they didn't do that at that time. We had no problem staying for 10 months. And he paid me cash. I'd come in at the end of the month, and he'd open a drawer and take out a bunch of money and give him my pay. I always wondered, maybe he had like a gun on top of that wad of cash he had in his drawer. Who knows? But I was able to work that way, and he found me an apartment. So that part worked out amazingly. But again, there's no way. I think my book, I say, is more of a how not to do book than a how to do book, because you can't repeat what I did and say, hey, I'm going to do what Paul did. Well, you can't stay for more than 3 months. You probably can't get a job the way I did and find an apartment. You'd have to go through a lot more red tape. But we did try to get a permesso di soggiorno, and we went 6 times to the questura and finally gave up because of the requirements they were trying to make us go through. Well, I realized later that if you just go to a different questura, you'd probably be okay, because we found so many times that we'd go to one official and they'd say, oh, no, that can't be done. And then you'd go to another one, could be in the same office, and they'd say, oh, yeah, no problem. It happened when Lucy tried to get her bus pass. We tried to get a monthly bus pass, and they went up and said, oh, no, you can't get this without a permesso di soggiorno. And I already had mine because I'd been there a week earlier. So I said, look, there's another clerk. There's 2 lines there. We're just going to go through the other line, and I'll put the money out and the form out, just like that. Hopefully the clerk was 5 feet away, wasn't going to look over and say, hey, we just said you can't do that. But so we ran into that kind of, red tape. We got our monthly bus passes. We had lots of misadventures on trains. One time we got on a train going the wrong direction. Another time, one of my older daughter was going to come visit us, and she was cutting in the middle of the night, and we thought, well, what if she's asleep? So I asked permission to the conductor. Can I just go through as like a little train with like 4 cars? Can I just go through and see if my daughter's on there asleep? And he said, sure. So I ran through and looked, no, she's not there. The next train pulled in, and it was a little bit longer. So I got on, and the train started up with me on it. So there I am going somewhere. No ticket. She's not on the train. And the train went for about 20 minutes before it stopped. I had to get off and at this station at like 4 a.m. and it was freezing to death because it was December. And then I had to get back on again, and I hid in the bathroom so they wouldn't ask me for my ticket. Got back to Ottawa. So anyhow, right. We did a lot of things wrong, but it was just unforgettable experience. It was a great time. We'll remember those forever.
And I'm here today with Peter Francesi, and he's the author of 2 great books, Tales of a Brooklyn Grocer and Nettie, the Tales of a Brooklyn Nana. So welcome, Pete. Thanks for being here.
Or even another story with the policeman that would come in, and there were a bunch of these kind of stores. It was called the Francesi Italian-American Grocery Store, according to a picture I found. And there were like a bunch of little shops like this right in the area. So the cop, my great-grandfather would charge him, say, 15 cents for a ham and cheese sandwich, but he'd charge her about, say, 25 cents. I'm just giving an example. And the cop came in, and he says, well, your father charges me 15 cents. He tells me the oldest sister, Margie, and she said, I'm not my father. If you want it for 20, he goes, if you want it for 15 cents, you can go down the store to one of the other places. And so you just go make the sandwich. So my grandfather laughed. He said that his sister, who was the oldest sister, although she had a high school education and wasn't allowed to go to college like her brothers, he said was a better business person than his brother or his father had ever been. So there was a lot of inspiration and inspiring characters that came through their life growing up in that little house.
I'll tell you a funny bakery story about my uncle. My uncle worked for
Right.
a bakery in Corona, Queens, Leonard's, and they were connected. And he was the baker. He had to be 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And I guess he would park in a certain spot. And one day he comes out and there's a parking ticket on the car. And he had never gotten a parking ticket before, right? So he takes the parking ticket and he puts it up behind the counter.
Right.
And the sergeant comes in and orders, his pastries or whatever. Where normally back then, we're talking the 50s, they didn't,
Right.
they didn't pay. And my uncle tells him, $2, $3, whatever. So, what do you mean $2, $3? He says, you see the ticket? He says, when the ticket's paid off, you get it for free again. The sergeant made the policeman who gave him the ticket come in, give him the money for the ticket.
Great. See, I mean, that it just shows you that, back then people figured things out themselves. They didn't go to social media to fight it out. Instead of they just faced each other and they solved their problems and moved on. And that's what I think is part of the simplicity of life that was lost from my grandfather's generation to my own.
Yeah, no, that's
We'll
true.
never get it back. But it made me think about why my grandfather couldn't understand the complexities of life at times. He was perplexed by, how things happen with people, or how we got so far into problems. And he was somebody that was very much had a total recall of the past, but he was very interested in the current life that he was living. And even though he was 92 when he died in December 2019, he had no interest in going. He was interested in living.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the last conversation with him. My grandfather had lost 2 wives, and both were young when they passed. And I said to him, "Are you going to be with your wives?" He goes, "No, I want to stay with yous." That's one of my favorite lines of our last conversation. I want to stay with yous.
My mother came as a child in 1914. She's a 5-year-old child. My father came as a 27-year-old veteran of World War I from Cassoli in Abruzzo.
So what year was that?
1925.
So was that just before they put that, with the restrictions on, or was he able to get in?
Well, as a matter of fact, it was after. And as a matter of fact, he was illegal. And in fact, he was doubly illegal. He, for some reason, I haven't figured it out. I should. I never asked. He never told. But he went to Cuba first and stayed for a while. It might have been a couple of years in Cuba. And then he took a ship from Cuba to New Orleans in August of 1935, 25, and he was a clandestine, illegal stowaway, and they caught him. And at first, in my first research, I thought they caught him and let him go. But now I found more information. They actually deported him back to where he came from. Well, a couple of weeks later, he came in on the same ship, and I don't know how he did it, but they didn't catch him. And he ended up in Chicago a little bit later and worked there for about 7 or 8 years before he married my mother in Chicago Heights.
That's so interesting. That's funny. So was he able to become a legal citizen, or it didn't matter?
Oh, well, it did matter. He married my mother. Maybe he married her for her citizenship. She gained citizenship naturally when she was born because my grandfather was a citizen. But during the 1930s, my father did apply for citizenship. but they didn't let him have it. He was studying for it, but when World War II broke out, he was declared an enemy alien. And then I now have new records that have just come through of a number of hearings that took place in downtown Chicago to investigate his status. And since he was without papers, they prevented him from getting it. They set up something for him to go to Canada and to apply for citizenship to the U.S. consul there, but somehow there was a problem with his employment, and they did not certify it. So he did not get his citizenship until 1947, and we're pleased that it happened. But it was a big rigmarole, and it was a big worry factor all during World War II.
I'm used to New York that's 300 years old, and Naples is a few thousand years old. So it's a bit different.
Yeah.
Um,
It's beautiful because if you walk through the city, I mean, you can still see 1,000 years old things.
yeah.
There
Yeah.
is one thing in particular. I don't know if you have it in the back, but you got something in the back of your picture, and that's a castle. But we got plenty of castles here in my hometown. And one of the castles that people always ask me is called the Maschiangino, which is at the port of Naples. So try to imagine you want to go to Capri, for example, which is a very well-known island. And in order to get the ferry, you're gonna walk through history because it's gonna be like the castle right in front of you. And then it's a castle that's called, again, the Maschiangino. It comes from the 12th century. And if you go there and you visit the castle, you go up to the basement, you're going to see the Roman era because that's where the Romans were, also the Greeks were, because we're a Greek city. And they're currently going under a construction site where the castle is, and they're trying to build within the Metro Line a museum because they found 3 Roman ships. So it's amazing, that you just walk through history, and just like what happens when you go to Rome. But don't forget about Naples as well. Naples has been around since not only a couple of years or 100 years, as you said. It's been literally thousands of years, and still to a day we have things that would go from the Renaissance, from the Enlightenment, and from back to Roman or the Greek area. And that's so for those who are, of course, history fans, Naples is the way to go, and also foodie fans, Naples is the way to go. Cultural activities, Naples is just beautiful, Bob. I mean, you mentioned that before, but if you go into the historical center, that's where people live. Although now it's becoming, populated by tourists, but it's still not a touristy area because people live there and they live their life. So it's not like going maybe to. I've never been to New York, but I can imagine. I mean, if you go right in the middle of New York, there will be people that actually live there, but there are a lot of tourists, of course. Naples is a mix, so you can find yourself in a shop where people and usual people and people from Naples actually go there and buy the groceries, and it's going to be the same quality. And you can meet people and try to exchange some words. Bear in mind, they're not going to speak your language. You guys are not going to speak their language, but you will understand them, and they will understand you. And it's just a mix of cultures, a mix of happiness, and it's amazing. I just love it.
So my dad's parents were Francesco Ferrante and Lucy Castiglione. My mother's parents were Antonio Torres and Sophie Spano. And all of them were friends. So I grew up with this incredible extended family, very loving. I thought everyone was like that, and realized much later that I was very fortunate to have the situation that I had. And there was not a jerk in the bunch. It was very loving. And I was very close to all my uncles and aunts who are now starting to go. And I lost three of them this past year. My Uncle Ralph Torres, Aunt Marie Torres, my Aunt Rose Torres passed away just recently. So that's where I am right now. And those of us who know what it's like to grow up with a close extended family know that those aunts and uncles were like mothers and fathers. That, if you were lucky, and that's what I had. I had very loving grandparents and uncles and aunts. And I travel as an actor since I was 22. It's been almost 38 years. And I always receive cards and letters and care packages and phone calls from that extended and more immediate Italian family, along with the Groucho show, which again is, which I tour with to this day with the one-man show, which is very interactive, and also an immigrant, it's an immigrant's humor. It's an outsider's humor. That's what Groucho and the Marshall of the Humor is in part, I believe. Those are trying to fit in and tearing down high society and finagling their way through it all. All of it appeals to me.
Well, and I was doing a little research. I mean, I read most of the books years and years and years ago. But I didn't realize until the day before yesterday, I think, that Chico was actually Chico. And I was looking for the reason behind the Italian character that he played. And it was because he used to impersonate, if he was in trouble, he would speak like the people that he was in trouble with, Italians or Irish or whatever, to try and talk his way out of getting beat up.
That's right, because there were a lot of Italian gangs or Irish gangs, and so he took on those accents to avoid any kind of pummeling he may have gotten if he was in the wrong neighborhood. So that was a survival mechanism, really, for him. He had a good ear, so he was able to pull it off.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I had never heard that before. And the other thing that I didn't realize, although I remember seeing it in the movies, was Groucho was the first one to actually address the audience in the movie.
I believe so. He broke the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Look, I got to stick around, but there's no reason why you folks can't go into the lobby until this blows over. I mean, that's all. Yeah, I mean, their first film, The Coconuts, was in 1929, so that was one of the first movie musicals. I guess the first talking musical was the Jazz Singer, of course, with Al Jolson. But so Coconuts came about shortly thereafter. But yeah, I mean, who doesn't love his asides? Whether it's in the films or on his quiz show, You Bet Your Life, for 14 years, or on talk shows with Dick Cavett when he throws a line out to us. There's nothing better.
Yeah, and I recall, watching, George Burns and Gracie Allen, and he did it, to a great extent.
Oh, yeah.
But I was always fascinated that boy because he used to have the TV show going, and he was watching TV and he was watching what was going on. In the other room.
George Burns?
George Burns, yeah.
Yeah, it was a very much a meta scenario. It's clever, that device they use. It's like with Seinfeld bookending with his stand-up in his show, in the way the use of addressing us, the audience, in a way.
The reason I have you here is because I think you do the most amazing work.
Thank you.
And for people who don't know about Kate, she spends her weekends going through old photos in antique stores and garage sales and places like that, and then tries to place those photos with the family, correct?
That's correct. It's a labor of love, and I feel that it's my calling. Like I said before, I've grown up with genealogy. I've loved genealogy for so long, and just about 2 years ago now, my mom and I were going through some old family photos and separating them into piles. People we knew who were our relatives, and people who were friends of the family or war buddies or neighbors, people that meant something to my grandparents, but now we're a couple of generations removed. So I thought, let's try and get these photos back to where they belong, back to their family members. And that's kind of how it all started. And because I was familiar with the genealogy websites, I went on to ancestry.com and I looked up the names on the backs of the photos, and I met with success. This gentleman from Tennessee responded, and he said, "This is so exciting. You have a pile of photos of my relatives," and I'm speechless, and I can't wait to see them.
So now these were photos that you had in your family.
That's right.
That you were able to connect with somebody hundreds of miles away.
Right.
And now, was he a family? Now, was he a cousin or so?
No, he was honestly, I don't know exactly how my great aunt made the connection to him. This is kind of what our family thinks. So the last name in our family, my mother's maiden name is Strawn, Straun, and this gentleman's last name was spelled Straun. So at some point in time, pre-internet, I'm going way back into the 1940s, she had made this connection with these Tennessee Strauns. We could never make the blood connection, but they became really good friends, and we had photos of my family visiting them down in Tennessee and vice versa. And so it was just, it's still a mystery. It's one of those questions where you kick yourself because you wish you had asked when the person was still alive. But yeah, somehow they were connected.
And I thought it was interesting that you said way back in the 1940s. I was born in 1951, so
right.
I'm way back there.
All right, parents are watching. Sorry, guys.
Without giving away any secrets that you don't want to give away. So what's the process? How do you do this?
Right. So it starts with labeled photos. A lot of times people will ask, what can I do if I don't have any information on the photo? And unfortunately for the Photo Angel project, there's not much you can do at this point with an unlabeled photo. I don't use photo recognition technology. I get that question often as well. Yeah. So preferably first name, last name, and location. You can get away with no location if the surname is atypical, but John Smith with no location isn't going to get you very far.
Well, yeah, we Italians are lucky that, and I didn't know this until a couple of years ago. I was doing some research, and there's over 300,000 unique surnames in Italy. Because people were named just for the strangest things, the way they look, the way they act, where they came from. I have a good friend. His name is Nick Ducato, which a Ducati was money back then. So it's the 7 Ducati. So you start thinking through. You think, well, maybe the guy owed 7 Ducati. Maybe he found 7. Who knows? Right. But that's how they got the name.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I was told that my maiden name Norton means north of the town in England. I remember my grandmother sharing that with me.
Oh yeah, see. So there you go. That makes sense. That makes sense. So now you go to antique places, and do you go to the same ones? Do you go to different places in New England? Where do you go?
So I have my old standbys, if you will, but I like to try new places. We're a family that's out and about, so if we're traveling somewhere, we'll make sure that we find an antique store to stop at and poke around in. They are treasure troves of genealogical information. I encourage you to check your local antique store out if you want to try the Photo Angel project or just to browse around. You would be shocked at how much is in there as far as family items go.
Where I come from, the Abruzzese settled where I come from. In the 18th Street, 14th Street area, Astoria Boulevard. They were first the Salese, which is a town up near L'Aquila, and then the Orsognesi started to come. They started to migrate and settled in that area. So it was very heavy Italian. Orsognese. Orsogno is the town where we come from. So when I grew up, there were thousands of us there, thousands, to the point, we had a social club there. Actually, we had 2 social clubs on the same block of the same town.
That's funny.
Yeah.
My mom is Barese, and I had a lot of mix of different people because my father wound up there too, and his family was from Naples. But growing up, it's not, these neighborhoods aren't like that anymore. You walk down the street and all you heard was Italian.
Right. Absolutely. That's all you heard. And in fact, my mother never learned how to speak English because everyone around her spoke Italian or dialect. The stores in the area were all Italian. besides being Italian, many of them were from Abruzzo. So she even spoke dialect with them. So she never learned till her dying day, never learned how to speak English.
When you go over to Italy and they're so deep into the heritage and the history, and they're so proud of everything that they have, even these small little towns, it's so foreign to us.
Yes.
And I tell people, people say I'm going to go to Italy. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go to Rome. I'm going to go to Florence. You're going to go to the hometown? No, I don't know. I don't know anybody there.
Right.
But that's where you're from.
Oh, right. A lot of people don't even know where they're from. They have no clue. If you ask them, they'll say, "Oh, somewhere in Naples." And I'm like, "What? You never went? You never asked? You never saw any documents? You never, like, why don't you know? Well, how come you don't know where your family is from? And for us, it was embedded in our minds. It was instilled where we came from. My parents were very proud of Abruzzesi, very, very proud. I mean, I sent you some of the pictures. They used to perform in a folkloric group representing Abruzzo. They went all over Italy. They did an Abruzzo tours film I sent to you. And then when they came here, they were part of a folkloric group from Orsonia. And in fact, I was part of that group because they needed dancers, and I could dance, and I knew all the dances. So I was part of that for a good 15 years. I was part of that. And I sent you pictures also of that. That was a lot of fun. I was dressed in costume from Orsonia, from our town, and my mother made the costume. Part of the costume was very old. It was my great-great-grandmother's, nightshirt, and the apron was old and whatever, but my mother had to recreate the rest of the costume. So I went all over the tri-state area performing, especially during Italian Heritage and Culture Month. It was an experience. I met so many people from different communities. I met a lot of Italian Americans. I enjoyed it tremendously. Plus, when we sung the songs from Abruzzo, the dances, it was part of my existence, and it really made me what I am today. I can't even describe the experience. And God forbid some, other girls or, people my age did that. They wouldn't be caught dead doing that. They were like, what? Get dressed up in costume, folkloric costume, and go sing and perform in singing old Abruzzese folklore songs. They wouldn't be caught dead with doing that. Yeah. And yet I embraced it. I found it as an opportunity. Get out of the house, to perform, to dance, to do something. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it beyond belief. And it taught me a lot to be with people and how to interact with the community, and taught me everything about my own culture. And, and it's a shame that other people don't know anything about their own culture. And not only do I know about my Italian culture, I know about my Abruzzo culture, my Orsognese culture. I have tons of books on it that my uncle left me. And actually I fought with my sisters saying that I have to have the books. They wanted the books. I'm like, no, I get to keep the books. And in fact, for a family reunion, my cousin wanted me to write a history about Orsonia, our town that we come from. So I spent all of last summer, summer of 22, researching. So I went to every library. I pulled out every book. I emailed Italy or Sonia if anybody can give me information and whatever. And I wrote a nice 10-page, no, it was more. What am I talking about? It's a good 20, 25-page history on Orsonia, starting from the Roman times. And we published it and handed it out to family members. It was a family reunion. We were over 100 people. So that was nice. And I really loved doing it. I didn't know any. I knew the history of Orsonia, but I only knew maybe up until maybe from 200-300 years ago. I didn't know anything prior to that. I didn't know that it was really a Roman town. I had no clue about that, and why it was geographically positioned where it was. I had no clue about that. And then in my research, I found everything out. It was part of the path of the Transuanza, where the sheep go from Bari all the way up to L'Aquila. Every year, every season, the shepherds bring their flock up north during the summer and down south during the winter. So our town was smack in the middle. So they would pass us by, and in passing us by, a town was developed there. So I found that very interesting, So, and that goes back to the Roman times.
Yeah, and I learned about that when we were in Capocota because they showed us the same thing. They showed us the sheep path where they would go from Capocota in the mountains down into Puglia, every summer. And it was like so interesting. And in fact, we went to a restaurant and they made us a meal that the shepherds would eat, similar to what, not exactly, but, this similar kind of thing that they would eat, which was pretty, which was really pretty neat. And I'll send you a couple of those things from Anthony, though. I think you'd be really interested in it.
Yeah, I would be very interested.
He was such a, it was so sad. He was such a wonderful guy. And I only knew him, I don't know, maybe 6 months, but everybody who met Anthony came away with the same feeling, that this was a man dedicated to his Italian heritage, and that he would do anything to, propagate the history of the people who came from Italy into America, mostly in Boston because that's where he was from. But it was just a super guy, no question about it. Well, listen, this has been so much fun. I mean, I think we could probably do another 3 hours here.
Oh, yes, probably.
But certainly looking forward to the museum opening. And once it, let me know when it opens, either you or Dr. Shelsa, so I could put it out
we'll be
there.
putting out press releases and all of that. It'll be all over the place when we open. Yeah.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
When they came, did they come in? You mentioned that there's a large community there, but was it a large community back then, or it was just starting to grow?
So there was Italians that had already come here, and it's funny you say that because part of my research is I've always been fascinated with what brought you here, like what brought them here, and what did they come to? It would have been really frightening, particularly Australia, like to sail into Ellis Island would be completely different to sail into Hobson's Bay here in Victoria. There was very little here even. My great-grandfather, and he puts it on his naturalization documents, that he didn't like to have much to do with the Italian community, which was interesting. And the family, it's funny that I saw that written in documents, and yet my great aunt, who's still with us and remembers him, said, he never ever wanted to mix with the people. He never wanted to shop in the Italian shops, and that was something they knew. That was a comfort of home, and he never wanted to do that. He wanted to be, I guess, British from the moment he came here or chose to come here. So when my grandfather and his brother arrived, they actually flew into Darwin. They couldn't speak a word of English. And my grandfather, his photo is in the newspaper as that all they could say, they were going to a place in Victoria called Port Campbell, which was where my great-grandfather's farm was. But, the people, wherever they were in the, airport, I suppose, couldn't understand their accents. And so they thought they were saying Port Kembla, which is not in Victoria. And so they're saying, they need to get to Port Kembla. And he's, there's a photo of my grandfather like looking through this book, and there was a lady that traveled with them that they stayed in contact with. She was from home as well. But they finally got there in the end. But even then, like, to fly in, even I know now where we are, we're at the very southern tip of the country other than Tasmania. They flew into the very top. I can only imagine back then it was still, a whole other journey again to get from where they were to where they needed to be.
How did you come about to write this story about the War of the Vespers, 800-900 years ago.
Yeah, wow. I mean, where do I start to unpack all of this? So when I set out to write my first novel, I wanted to write a novel about Sicily. I wanted to write something that had to do with my heritage. And when I was looking around, and especially growing up, the first thing I usually heard when I told people about my Sicilian heritage was kind of a reference to that dreaded M word, oh, hey, like the mafia, the Godfather, hey, like stuff like that. And there's this, I guess I want to say there's this stereotype of Sicilians as that mafia centric place. I mean, that's pretty much what you hear, gangsters, mobsters, stuff like that. And I grew up on epic stories like, Joan of Arc and Braveheart and Gladiator. So when I set out to tell a story about Sicily, I wanted to paint it in a more heroic light. I wanted to interpret it from a new lens, in a way that made Sicily seem like the grand kingdom that it once was. It was actually its own kingdom. Obviously before it became part of Italy. It was conquered by every civilization in the Mediterranean, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans. So Sicily has this long history that a lot of people don't really know about. And I wanted to capture all of that through the lens of a historical epic in the style of a Braveheart. So that kind of started me on my journey as I wrote this historical thriller, as I like to call it.
So as you're researching this, how do you come up with, a heroine and the villain and all of that kind of stuff? What's the process to pick Etna as the heroine and make her the focal point of the novel?
Yes, well, you did ask this. So yes, so the book is based on an event, a true event called the Sicilian Vespers. And this event took place in Sicily, in Palermo, the capital of Palermo, in 1282. And what happened was, on the night of Easter, the people of Palermo were coming together to celebrate. And the French at that time occupied Sicily, and they were known to be very abusive, a lot of cases of rape and molestation. And what happened was, as the Sicilian people were coming together to celebrate Easter at the Easter Vigil, the French kind of showed up, crashed the party. They started groping the women, bullying the men. And allegedly, as the legend goes, a woman took out her blade. She stabbed a French soldier and she cried, "Morano li Francesi," which means death to the French, or the death to the Angevins. And that sparked this people's uprising in Palermo that eventually spread across the whole island, where the Sicilians essentially slaughtered 3,000 French soldiers, men, women, anybody who spoke French. Siciliana essentially puts the woman at the center of that story. And I gave her a name, Etna Vesperi, Etna named after the great volcano, of course. And so I fictionalize the story and give it to this woman named Etna. And you see her as she goes on her journey, inspiring the people and fighting the French.
Yeah, that's so neat. So now, as I'm reading the book, I've delved way back into my ancestry, because my paternal grandmother comes from two noble families, and I actually can trace back to both Roger and Charles I as direct descendant from them.
Wow.
So it was very interesting that I was going through it, that I'm kind of, wow, I'm on both sides of this conflict.
Now, when you say Charles I, do you mean Re Carlu, Charles I of Sicily?
Yes.
During the time of the Vespers? Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And it's all through my paternal grandmother's mother, because she is, I don't know if you ever heard the name Caracciolo, but she was a Caracciolo, and they were, from 950 on, one of the most, and still today, one of the most, known families in Naples. And I was also interested, as I was going through it, that the Sicilians then petitioned the Spanish at some point, which was, I didn't know that part, that early on, that they had petitioned the Spanish.
Yes. So there's multiple, there are a few interpretations of how that worked. Some say the Teutonic Knights betrayed the Sicilian people by bringing the Spanish in, and essentially the Spanish then came in and conquered. Mm-hmm. Others say that that was always part of the plan, that they were always kind of like fishing for a new leader, and that happened to be Spain. So yes, in my book, I like to, I won't give it all away, but I do pick one of those lanes and I go down one of those lanes.
I think the both of us are trying to do the same thing. We're trying to give a window to the Italian Americans, so that they can be known, and again, back to the history that we know our history. And just, to digress a little bit, you also do another fascinating little bit, where you do that Italian American moment, I think you call it, and you tell people not about the Joe DiMaggios and the Sylvester Stallones and those people, but the people that really contributed a lot to our history in America that nobody ever heard of.
Well, just recently, so for everyone, I do these videos, very short videos. I try not to go over a minute. Writing those is a different technique, because now you're trying to take this ton of information and condense it to 1 minute. It's just like giving people that little quick overview of this invention, accomplishment, story, in hopes that, hey, if they really enjoy this person or this subject, they'll research it a little more. So just recently, I was blown away. These two twin sisters that recently came to our Italian Cultural Center and started volunteering, they said, wow, I told them about these Italian American moments, and they go, you should do one on Simon Rodia. I'm like, okay, who's Simon Rodia? So I look it up. Bob, I was blown away. I was blown away. Never heard of this gentleman. The Watts Towers in California. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. I kind of think you are from your expression.
Yeah.
I was blown away. What an incredible accomplishment. And I was giddy getting the info, writing this moment, and then having patience waiting for my son to help me make the video, which unfortunately, that's he's a great, great son, and God bless him for helping me, but he does have a life as well. So I was waiting, and we finally did it. And I was like ecstatic to do it. And I mean, real quick story, Italian immigrant, not even 5 feet tall, decides to start building on his property in Watts, which I'm not real familiar with California, but I think it's not like the greatest of areas. And he starts building these towers out of materials he finds, out of garbage. And he was a tile setter, so I mean, he you knew what he was doing, obviously. And he would bend pipe on the railroad track. He had no ladder. He had no scaffolding. He had no power equipment. Okay, he had a bucket, a hammer, a shovel, a chisel, and his hands. And this little man would build a section and then climb up it and build another section and then climb up it and build another section. And the tallest one's 100 feet high. Did this by himself over 30 years every day. And he left it. He just donated it. He wanted to do something big. And he looked up to fellow Italians like Michelangelo and Galileo, and he wanted to do something big, and boy, he did it. And after he was gone, the city, they either wanted to move it or they wanted to destroy it. I'm not really sure, but they said, oh, it's not safe, so, we can't keep this here. And they brought a crane and they tested it, and son of a gun, the thing was built like Fort Knox from this little man. And I mean, my God, it's a movie waiting to happen. It's a lot of things. He did have a little bit of publicity. He was on the cover of the Beatles album, the album cover, which, today's youth wouldn't even know what I was talking about. But back in the day when they had records, the album cover was a big deal. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover. There's all these famous people, and there's a picture of him.
Really?
And yes. So, I mean,
now I have to go look at the album.
Famous, but not. You know what I mean? He was part of that pop culture thing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, just stuff like that. I've done, I think, 103 of these Italian American moments, and I'm very proud of those. And if my goal is they're a tool to learn for our people. That's it. A tool to learn, to inspire, to give a little spark for, I want to know more. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. And, you know, we don't get enough credit for these unsung heroes like that. You know,
Oh, it's okay.
the people that built America and
Yes.
things.
Yes. No, there's so, and like you said, there's so many stories out there. And, you know, me, you, we're reading about it. We're looking at things. We're researching things. And then all of a sudden you get this name and you look it up and go, I never heard of this guy. And I'm blown away. I really was. It just shows you how much more is out there. And for people, I think like you and me, it's a thrill to find out about it. We're just so happy to let everybody else know about it. I have such pride letting them know, to say, hey, this is a good one. You want to see this one.
Where's your family from in Italy?
So I'm kind of, I like to joke around and say I'm an Italian mutt. So I'm predominantly, my dad's from Puglia and my mother is Sicilian. But then again, mom's grandmother was from up north. We thought it was Genoa, but like recently I've been doing a little more like research, and we're finding that name is not from Genoa, but possibly from Sardinia. So I'm in the process now of digging a little deeper, which excites me very much because my son one of my sons is completely in love with Sardinia. So I'm like, okay, well, if we're from there, it's a good place to buy a house.
I haven't been there, but I have Sardinian roots going back to like, I don't know, 1100 or some crazy thing that. And I'd love to go there. Well, there's so many places that I want to visit, but haven't been there. But you go to Italy all the time, yeah?
Yeah, I do. I go, well, now a couple times a year, but for extended periods of time. So I'm there, like right now this year, I was there for a month now in April, and then I'm going back in a couple of weeks for the summer, and I'm going to come home for a month and then go back again for the fall. So I'll be there like mid-September till mid-November. So it's kind of my dream.
Great. Yeah, that's great. So when did your grandparents come and where did they settle?
Well, so my dad, actually, I'm first generation on my dad's.
Oh, okay.
My dad came over in 1957 from Roseto Val Fortore, which is in northern Puglia, it's a little mountain village, and that's actually where I take people. So we'll come back to that. And he came here when he was 16, finished high school here, and lived here the rest of his life. I mean, he's 82. He still goes back and forth also with me. So it's always fun.
I bet. So now was it, I have a friend that I just connected with after not talking to my neighbor from around the corner and his wife, she was born in Italy. And she said it was a real culture shock for her coming from a small town in Italy. And I guess she came probably maybe around the same time. I mean, we're in our 70s. So,
wow.
What did your dad say about that? I mean, what was his experience coming?
Well, when he told me that when he came here, first of all, he came over on the Christopher Columbus ship. So I've got a cool picture of him with his friend who was had the same name as me. His name was Dorino, and he always used to tell me as a kid, "Oh, you have a beautiful name." Always thought that was cool. But anyway, the two of them came over on the same ship, and he was high school age kid, but he said he truly thought that he was going to see streets paved in gold. So he was disappointed. And I guess, when you're a kid from a peasant village, it's not hard to think that, wow, there's something big out there. And, it doesn't seem unrealistic. It seems, wow, that could be, that's the stories you hear and that's the stories you believe.
So why did his parents, or did he come by himself?
He came by himself. His mom died when he was, I think, 11 or 12, and his dad had just remarried over there. And so he decided that he should come here. And so he came and lived with his uncle, my great uncle, who was his mother's brother, who was already in the Washington, D.C. area. So that's where he came.
Wow, that's something. That takes a lot of guts to come over at 16 years old.
Yeah. And, my dad had an interesting story because he was born in 1941. and during the war, and he was actually born in Ethiopia. So even though and technically it was Italy because it was a colony of Italy at the time, but it was but it was Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and he was there until he was, I think he said, almost 2, and then but then the British came in and kicked the Italians out, and so to speak. This is the story I got from my uncle who had gone to Venezuela, and I saw him in Italy one last time before he died. But my dad's older brother, he was about 9 or 10, so he's telling me this story of their life and exodus from Ethiopia from his 10-year-old perspective. So he said, so the British came in, they all got put in camps, and my dad actually caught malaria as a baby, and they're on this ship that had to go around the southern tip of Africa to get back to Italy, because then he said the Italian ship came and brought us back to Italy. And so anyway, and my dad tells the story that, even in our little peasant village, the Germans had come through and the Americans had come through, but he claims that it was an American, there was somebody visiting from the States who spoke some English, and my dad, as a baby, had gotten back to Italy and has malaria. And he said that this American Rosatan went down to the encampment of the American soldiers at the bottom of town, and he got the quinine from them, which is what saved my dad. So he says the Americans saved his life. So it was kind of one of those stories, but it was a rough time, and my grandfather was a prisoner of war in India then for, I think, 4+ years. But my dad sent my mom and me and my sister back when I was about 4, because he wanted us kids to learn Italian in the Italian way. So I went back just long enough. I mean, I think we went back for like half a year, but I went to preschool there. So I went to preschool in the village, and I guess I learned how to speak Italian. My mom said I didn't speak English when I came home for a while, and then all of a sudden she said I only spoke English and wouldn't go back to the Italian, but we kept going back, and so I always spoke it, and I've always luckily held on to it. I studied it some in college. In high school I studied Spanish, so I'm fluent in both, just because they're so similar. And of course, growing up, my dad had an Italian restaurant after the dream of the barbershop. He wanted to have a restaurant named Roseto after our town in Italy, down in Bethesda, Maryland, in the 80s and 90s. So at work, I got to practice my Spanish and my Italian because half the employees were Italian, half were Hispanic. So I got to practice both. And I came out of high school speaking, a couple languages. So it worked out pretty good for me. So anyway, and I do speak the dialect as well, which, speaking a dialect, I just have to touch on this for a second, but speaking a dialect is like putting your pajamas on. It's comfortable, it's cozy, it's just, it's very personal. So like when I'm in the village, I don't speak Italian. When I'm in the village, I speak dialect, because you don't want to sound, like somebody else told me that they had moved away and they speak, they have to work in business and they speak pure Italian. And he said, but there's no way I can speak Italian in the village, because then I'm above everybody. You gotta be part of the gang. You just got to get back into the local. And it's very, and there's certain words and certain things that they say that just have so much more meaning when you say them in dialect. It's so much more feel. It's like you're really getting into everything. So it's kind of cool.